Lesson number 56 and fourth lesson on the login and registration forms. We are learning JavaScript and we are learning JavaScript by examples. In the last lesson, we learned how to add some CSS animations, in that when you click into any of the input fields, the text seems to be jumping down, and when you click into another field, this text jumps back up. And the same thing happens to this input field. In today's lesson, we learn how to add this toggle visibility icon. So password visibility, what it is when I type in a password and I click onto this icon, the password becomes visible, and when you click onto it again, the password becomes hidden again. So this is the functionality that we are going to add today, and we'll learn how to do that. So I will change the size of my browser, and this is the HTML document that I created last time, and this is the exact copy of it, and I've just renamed it to represent 56th lesson and 56th lesson of the series and the 4th lesson of the login and registration form. And this is the form that we have here. So I will right mouse click and open it with my text editor, and you can use any text editor that you want. This is the document that we have written so far, our HTML, our CSS, and today we'll be adding some JavaScript to it. The first thing is to make that eye icon visible, and there are so many ways that you can do it. But what I'll do, I will just go to Google and I will search for something called Fafa Eye. Now this is from Font Awesome, and they provide all sorts of icons for the websites. So I will copy this line of code, right mouse click, copy. I will change the size of my browser one more time, and I will add this line of code just below the input password input field, okay, just below this field. If I save it, nothing will happen because I will also have to find a CDN library. CDN, this one is from Cloudflare, and I'm looking for the library which is 5-13.1. This is the version. When I click onto it, and this is the first link, and the latest version is beta version 6.0.0. so I will find the version that I have used in past successfully, which is 5.13.1, and this is a link to a CSS file with Font Awesome library hosted onto this website. So I'll copy the link tag, and I will change the size of my browser one more time. I will go back to my form, and within my head tag I will paste that link to that CSS file. Maybe did not copy it. Copy the link tag and paste it here. So if I just go back to my form, and if I save it and if I refresh it, you can see there is an icon visible just above the text password. All we have to do is to apply some CSS rules to make it visible on the right side. And to do that, I will go back to my HTML area, and I will enclose these two lines of code in a div container. Okay, so div element is like a container that can hold other elements. So both these elements are enclosed in this div element. In other words, this div element has two children. and I will also enclose this I element, which represents icon in this case, and I'll enclose this in a span element. Okay, so span, an opening span tag and a closing span tag. So what we have now is a parent element, which is div, two children, an input element and a span element, and this span element also has a child. So this div element has two children and one grandchild. So this span element has one child. This is the parent for this one, and this is the grandparent. So notice all our span element have an opacity of 0 when the page is loaded, and I have just enclosed this icon in a span element. What it means, if I save it and refresh it, the icon that was visible a minute ago has become hidden. So we can fix that, and we do not want to mess with any other span elements. So what I will do, I will give this a class, and I will call it, I will say parent I. Okay, so this is the parent element for I, and now that we have given this span element a class, I will copy this, and we can target this element in our CSS area. And if you remember, in order to target an element with the help of class, you have to type a dot and the name of the class, and an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket, and I can simply say opacity is equal to 1. So if I save it and refresh it, the icon has become visible one more time. I want to move it towards the right side of the form, so I will say right 0 pixel to be very precise. If I save it and if I refresh it, nothing happens. This is because I will also have to describe the position, and I will say absolute. Now the position absolute positions an element onto the body. Okay, so what it means, that this icon should become visible here, 0 pixel from the right hand side. So if I refresh it, the icon has become visible on the far right side. If I, for example, give it a top of 0 as well, the icon should be visible here. If I save it and refresh it, the icon is visible here. So we don't want that. This was just for learning purpose. So save it one more time and refresh it, and it is responsive no matter how big or small your browser is. Because the position is absolute, the icon will not change its position. And notice that this element has gone beyond the boundaries of the parent, and we want this icon to remain within the boundaries of the parent. So I can give this a class as well. Okay, and I will call it grandparent. Okay, so grandparent of this element. So I will copy the name of the class so that I can target this within our CSS area, because we are targeting an element with the help of a class. So I will type in the dot, I will paste in the name of the class, an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. And in order to make sure that this child remains within the boundary of this element, I will say position relative. Okay, So position relative for the grandparent and position absolute for the parent. So if I save it, the icon should jump back within this form. So if I save it and refresh it, the icon has become visible where we want it to be. If I click into this input field, the icon jumps back down, and notice that the size of the icon is bigger than what it is when I click into the input field. So I want to change the size of the icon to this size. Okay, so I will say font size 12 pixel. Okay, so the font size now is similar to this one, and if I save it and if I refresh it, the icon is 12 pixels, and if I click into this input field, the size of the icon does not change. The icon is also jumping down, and we don't want that. So we can say top 30%, and I have experimented with these numbers, and that's why I know what these numbers are. So if I save it and if I refresh it, this is where the icon is present right now. I will also say transform and translate Y to this many pixels. Okay, so 35 pixels. If I save it and refresh it, this is where the icon is, and if I click into this input field, the icon does not seem to be jumping up or down. If I click out of this input field, the icon remains where it is. So that's better. Also, if you notice, when I hover my mouse over onto this button, the shape of the cursor changes to something that looks like a hand, and that represents that this element is clickable. Okay, this element is clickable. And when I move my cursor out of the button, the shape of the cursor changes back to what is known as default. And when I click into this input field, the shape of the cursor changes to something else. So we want to, when I hover my mouse over this icon, I want the shape of the cursor to change to this pointer icon, which looks like a hand. So we can simply say cursor pointer. Okay, so if I save it and if I refresh it and hover my mouse over the icon, nothing happens. But when I click into this input field and then hover my mouse over the icon, it changes to a different shape, which looks like a hand and which represents that the icon is clickable. However, we want our cursor to change shape as soon as we hover my mouse over the icon. The reason it is not doing that at the moment, because a number of elements are overlapping on top of each other, and we want our icon to be on top of all the elements that are overlapping. So there's a span element, there's an input element, and to make this icon available on top of all the elements, we can use a property that is known as z index. Okay, z index I will say it 3. Okay, so if there are 3 elements, this would become on top of all the other elements. So if I save it and if I refresh it and if I now hover my mouse over, the cursor changes the shape. If I move away, the cursor changes its shape back to normal, back to a default pointer. All we have to do now is to add some JavaScript so the password becomes visible when we click onto this button. And to do that, I will go towards the bottom of the page, bottom of the document, and just above the closing body tag I will say is script. Okay, the best practice is to type the JavaScript code at the end of the page. So an opening script tag and a closing script tag for the browser to know that we will be using our JavaScript here. The next thing is that we want to target this input element, this one, and we want to change the type password. The reason password is hidden is because the type of this input is password. If I change it to text and save it and refresh it, the password will no longer be hidden. And to make the password hidden, we have to have type password. So with the help of JavaScript, we somehow have to target this element, and when this button is clicked, we have to change this type to text. So I will say document dot get element by ID. This is a built-in method that we have used several times in past, and this method targets an element with the help of ID. At the moment, this element does not have any ID, so I will give this an ID is equal to, and I will call it input password. Okay, so the ID of this element is input password. So I will copy the ID and I will paste this here, Control V. And I also want to save this element and all of its properties in a variable. So I will say let A is equal to, so I've created a variable, and in the usual practice you create variable with meaningful names. Now because we are learning, so I'm trying to be as simple as possible. I'm trying not to confuse you. So I have created a variable that is A, and it is holding everything that is within this element. Okay, so all these properties of this element are also saved in this variable. Now that we have saved everything in a variable, I can use an if condition, and the usual format of if condition is the keyword if, parenthesis, and an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. So if is a condition, we are saying if A dot type, okay, and then comparison operator 3 equal to sign, and within quotations I will say password. We are saying if the type of this input element is password, then within these brackets change the type. This is assigning a value, and I will say text. Okay, what we are saying, as soon as the page loads, check if the type of this input field, and we are targeting this input field with the help of ID. If the type is equal to password, then change the type to text. So if I save it now and refresh it, the script will run. Of course, the input type is password, and that's why the password becomes hidden, but this will check if the type is password and it will change it to text. So if I type in a password, the password is visible. So we don't want this to happen. We only want this to happen when we click on this icon. So what we can do, we can simply convert this into a function, because function will only run when it is called. So I will say function and I'll call it show password, And the usual format of the function, the way to create a function, again braces, and then an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. Okay, and I will enclose all this code within the body of this function. So if I save it and if I refresh it now, although we are seeing here that check to see if the type of this input element is password, then change it to text, but we are not calling this function anywhere. So if I save it and refresh it, and if I type the password now, it remains hidden. So we have to call this function on the click of this icon, which is just here. So I will say on click, and what we want to do when this icon is clicked, we want to run this function. So copy and paste this here. Quotations and quotations. All right. So if I save it now and refresh my page, type in my password and click onto this icon, the password becomes visible. Although if I click again, nothing happens. That is because we have to also say that if the type is text, change it back to password. Okay, so I will say else, which means if the type is not password, change it to a.type is equal to password. So we're checking when the button is clicked, we run this function, we check if the type of this element is password, change it to text. Otherwise, if it is not password, it is text or something else, change it back to password. So if I save it now and refresh it, type in a password, click on this icon, the password becomes visible. When I click again, the password becomes hidden. We can do all sorts of funny things here. We can also say a, which is the name of the variable, style.color is equal to red. When the password becomes visible, when we want to change the color to red to indicate that this should not be visible to people. So if I save it and if I refresh it and type in my password, click on this icon, the password, the text becomes red, and when I click back onto it, the hidden password is also red. So we have to fix two things. We want to change the color back to black, so I will copy this, Control C, and I will paste this here, and I will change it back to black. Save it, refresh it, type in a password, it is hidden and it is black in color. I click onto this icon, the text becomes red. When I click back onto it, the password becomes hidden and the text becomes black one more time. We can change the color of this icon as well when the password is visible, and to do that we have to target this element with the help of ID as well. So I can say ID is equal to I, for example. So the ID of this element is I. So I will copy this line of code rather than retyping it, and I will paste it here, and I will change the name of the variable. I will call it B, and the ID of this element is I. So I will change this to I, Control V. So we are targeting two elements. A is this element and B is this element. We're targeting these elements with the help of IDs. And I can say, I can copy this now, Control C and Control V, and this time I will target the element I and will change color to red, and I will also change it back to black when the icon is clicked back. Okay, so black. So save it, refresh it, type in a password. The color of the text is black, the color of the icon is black. If I click onto this icon, the color of the text becomes red, the color of the icon becomes red, and when I click again onto it, the color, the text becomes hidden, the color of the icon becomes black, and the color of the text becomes black. So this is it for today. I hope you learned something, and this will be the end of this project, and I will start the next project, which is very interesting. Thank you for watching, and thank you very much. I'll see you in the next lesson.